On a cold Tuesday morning in November, somewhere between the second and third cup of coffee he'd never actually finish, Nathan Holt got a call from a woman who introduced herself as the assistant to Claire Ashford, as in Claire Ashford of Ashford Capital, the woman whose face appeared on the cover of Report on Business magazine 3 months running, and whose company had just absorbed 2 competitors without so much as a press release. The assistant's voice was efficient and pleasant in the way of someone who had learned that pleasantness was faster than formality. She said Miss Ashford had a vehicle situation. She said Nathan's name had come recommended. She said the words restoration work and vintage and rather urgent, which in Nathan's experience meant something different to wealthy people than it did to everyone else. To everyone else, urgent meant this week. To wealthy people, it meant this afternoon. He wrote down the address on the back of a work order he'd already filled out, tucked it beside the gear shift of his truck, and told his daughter Lily that he had to go see about a car. Lily was 9 years old and deeply unimpressed by this information. She was sitting at the kitchen table working on a diorama of a beaver dam for her science class, which she had been working on for 6 days, and which had grown to include a functioning paper waterfall, 3 painted rocks, and a small felt beaver she'd named Gerald Jr., a name she'd arrived at independently, and which Nathan found quietly remarkable. She looked up just long enough to say, "Don't forget I have skating at 4. He wouldn't forget. He never forgot. The address took him north of Kelowna, up into the hills where the properties spread wide, and the views over Okanagan Lake made people forget how much the winters cost. The gate was stone and iron, and opened before he rolled down his window, which meant someone had been watching. The driveway was long and curved, and the gravel was the expensive kind that didn't kick up dust, and the house at the end of it was the kind of house that didn't try to impress you because it didn't need to. A woman met him at the front steps. Not Claire Ashford, an assistant, precise and courteous, who led him around the side of the house to a separate structure that called itself a garage, the way a concert hall calls itself a room. 4 bays, climate-controlled, lighting that belonged in a surgery. 2 modern cars Nathan recognized as being worth more than his building. And in the 4th bay, under a gray cover that did nothing to hide the shape underneath, the particular silhouette of something that had no business being under a cover at all. The assistant pulled the cover back, a 1967 Ford Mustang Fastback Brittany blue, the paint so original it still had the factory texture in the low light. Nathan stood back and looked at it the way you look at something you weren't prepared to feel anything about. He walked around it once without touching it. He crouched at the rocker panels. He ran his fingers along the seam at the base of the windshield. He looked in through the glass at the interior, which was intact and unmolested and had clearly been sitting, not driven, for a very long time. Then he opened the hood. He was still looking at the engine when Claire Ashford appeared. He heard her before he saw her. Unhurried footsteps on concrete. The sound of someone who moved through spaces like they owned them, which in this case she did. He straightened up and turned. She was younger than he'd expected from the magazine covers. Or maybe the magazine covers made everyone look like a version of themselves rather than the actual thing. She was in jeans and a dark jacket, phone in one hand, coffee in the other, and she looked at him with the particular expression of someone who had already formed a preliminary judgment and was deciding whether to revise it. "You're the mechanic," she said. "Nathan Holt. You called my shop. My assistant called your shop." She looked at the engine bay. 3 people have looked at this already. A restoration specialist from Vancouver, a guy from a classic car dealer in Calgary, someone who writes a column about American muscle for a collector magazine. She paused. None of them could tell me what was wrong with it. What did they tell you? That it needed a full carburetor rebuild. That the fuel system was compromised. That it might need a frame inspection. She said it with the tone of someone reciting a grocery list she didn't believe in. Nathan turned back to the engine. "It doesn't need any of that." She looked at him. The carburetor was rebuilt by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The fuel system's fine. He straightened up. "This engine has been modified. Whoever did it wasn't working from a factory manual. Is that a problem? Depends on who did it." He looked at the engine for a long moment. "I think I know." That wasn't quite true yet. He thought he recognized the method. The specific approach to the intake manifold, the way the valve timing had been adjusted, the hand-built linkage modification that had no reason to exist, unless someone was thinking 10 steps ahead of the factory spec. He had seen that particular combination of decisions in exactly one other place in his life, and the man who made them had died 11 years ago. Claire Ashford studied him. He didn't offer credentials. He didn't pitch himself. He just looked at the engine and let the silence sit. "Well," she said finally, "I can fix it, and I can tell you what it's worth once I understand it better." He looked at her. "Which is probably more than you think." She tilted her head. And then, in the tone of someone making an offhand remark rather than a significant statement, she said, "Fix it and you can name your price." A man beside her, dark blazer, mid-50s, the kind of jaw that photographs, well, laughed first. Others followed. It was the laughter of a room that had decided a thing was a joke before it had fully arrived. Nathan didn't laugh. He held her gaze for one extra beat, then looked back at the car. "I'll need a few days," he said, "and I work alone." He was back in his truck by 2:30. He sat in the driveway for a moment before starting the engine, looking out at the lake, visible through the pines. He flipped over the work order in the cup holder and wrote 2 words on the back. Derek Marsh. Then he drove back toward town, through the afternoon traffic, toward the arena where Lily was waiting. She came out the side door with one skate already untied, and a story she had clearly been preparing since before the session ended, about a boy in her group named Connor who had fallen twice and blamed both falls on the ice quality, which Lily found factually unsupportable. She explained this to Nathan in detail for the first 10 minutes of the drive home, using the word objectively twice, which she'd recently acquired and was deploying broadly. He listened. He asked the right questions. He thought about Derek Marsh and what it meant that Derek's hands had been inside Claire Ashford's Mustang. The garage he owned was a 2-bay shop on the edge of Winfield, a town that had been in the process of growing into something for about 8 years, without quite committing to it. The apartment above it was where he and Lily lived since he'd sold the house after Claire. His wife Claire, a coincidence in naming he'd noticed immediately, when the assistant called and filed away without examining, had died. That was 4 years ago. Lily had been 5. The apartment was small and warm, and covered in her artwork and his technical reference books, and a second-hand recliner that had outlasted 2 moves and a flood, and remained structurally sound, which he respected. That night, after dinner and homework, and the small negotiated theater of bedtime, Nathan sat at the table with his laptop and searched for Derek Marsh. The results were what they'd always been, the same handful of entries he'd looked at occasionally over the years. The way you press on a bruise to remind yourself it's still there. Derek Marsh, former lead engineer at a now-defunct performance tuning operation in Edmonton, known in collector circles for bespoke modifications to American muscle cars in the late 90s and early 2000s, disappeared from the industry in 2013. A forum post from 2016 suggested he'd died. Another from 2017 said he hadn't but didn't say where he'd gone. Nathan had been 26 when he left the automotive engineering division at a firm in Calgary and gone to apprentice under Derek, who at that point was operating out of a converted warehouse near Sherwood Park and building a reputation that was entirely word of mouth because Derek considered advertising a character flaw. He'd spent 18 months there. He'd learned things about the relationship between power and restraint in engine design that no university program had managed to teach him. He'd learned that the best modification was the one the car had been waiting for, not the one you wanted to perform. Then his mother got sick, and he came home to Kelowna. He met Claire at a garage sale. She was buying a set of socket wrenches she didn't know how to use but wanted to, and everything reorganized around that. He never went back to Sherwood Park. He never stopped being grateful for those 18 months. The grief of leaving had been covered over by the more important grief of watching Claire deteriorate over 2 years, and then the daily demanding work of being someone's only parent, and the version of himself that had existed in that warehouse in Edmonton had become something he carried rather than something he inhabited. He closed the laptop and looked at the dark window. Derek Marsh's fingerprints were inside Claire Ashford's Mustang. That wasn't coincidence. That was a question with a complicated answer, and Nathan needed to understand the question before he said a word of it out loud to anyone. He started work the next morning. Access code from the assistant. A text from someone named Patterson saying the staff would stay clear. He arrived at 7 with his full kit and a second bag he used for documentation, his digital camera, a set of precision measuring instruments, a notebook. The first day was entirely examination. He photographed everything. He recorded every modification in sequence, mapped the decision tree that Derek had followed through the engine. The work was extraordinary, not flashy. Derek had never been interested in flash. It was the opposite, a series of changes so integrated into the car's existing character that you had to know what you were looking for to find them. The result was a vehicle that could perform well beyond its factory spec without advertising that it was doing so. It was worth a significant amount of money, and not just for the performance, for the provenance, for the story. Nathan photographed every detail and sent the images to no one. He sat with them himself first. Around noon, Claire Ashford appeared. Alone, no phone visible, hair down. She stood in the garage doorway for a moment before walking in, looking at his documentation laid out across the work table. The photographs, the handwritten notes, the careful grid of what he'd found. "You actually came back," she said. "Said I would." She looked at the notes. "The other people didn't do this. The other people weren't finding what I'm finding." He waited a moment, then said, "Your car was modified by someone named Derek Marsh." I recognized his method. She didn't react with recognition. "Who is he?" "He was the best performance engineer working in Western Canada in the late 90s, possibly the best in the country, depending on who you asked. He trained me." Nathan paused. "I don't know where he is now. He disappeared from the industry about a decade ago." Claire looked at the engine as if seeing it for the first time. "How did this car end up here?" She said it more to herself than to him, which told him something. "That," Nathan said, "is a question worth answering. Because someone who knew about this car and what these modifications are worth hasn't told you about them." He held her gaze. "I'd want to know why." The second morning, Nathan arrived to find someone already in the garage. He was standing at the work table, looking at the photographs, hands in his pockets, the posture of a man in a room he considered his own. Nathan recognized him from the day before, the one with the good jaw who'd laughed first. "Mr. Holt." He turned and offered a handshake. "Preston Gale, I'm Claire's business director. I like to stay informed about things happening on the property. Those are my notes from my examination, of course." Preston's smile was warm and well-practiced. "I'm just curious about the car. Claire's had it 3 years. I found it for her, actually, through a private collector in Ontario. It came with an interesting story. Did the story mention the modifications? It mentioned custom work, part of the appeal. Did it mention who did the work?" Preston's smile held. "A Canadian specialist. I don't recall the name." A pause. "Should I?" Nathan looked at him for a moment. Preston Gale was a particular kind of careful, the kind of careful that looked like ease. "I'll need the provenance documents," Nathan said. "Whatever came with the car when Claire acquired it." "I'll look into that," Preston said, agreeably, picking up his jacket from the back of a chair he draped it on like he owned the room. "Let me know if you need anything." He left. Nathan stood in the quiet garage and looked at his photographs. Then he picked up his camera and took duplicate images of everything, and this time he emailed the copies to himself. The third day, he found the envelope. He had pulled the passenger side door card to inspect the inner seam, standard practice on a car this age, checking for hidden accident repairs. He wasn't looking for anything else. Behind the original moisture barrier, in the small cavity near the rear corner of the door, there was a sealed envelope. Old. The adhesive had dried and rebonded with time. The paper had gone the faint yellow of something that had been resting undisturbed for a long while. He held it for several minutes without opening it. He was a mechanic. He had no authority here, no official standing. The car wasn't his. He set the envelope on the work table and photographed it. Photographed the cavity, then looked at the front of it again. Written in handwriting he knew. The particular cramped, slanting print of a man who thought faster than he wrote and didn't apologize for it was a single line. "For whoever finds what I left here, you know what you're looking at or you wouldn't have gotten this far." Nathan sat down on the shop stool. He did not open it immediately, not in this garage, not without knowing more about what he was holding and what it was going to set in motion. He put it in the inner pocket of his work jacket. He spent 2 more hours documenting the engine. Then he drove home. Lily was at Mrs. Kowalczyk's, his neighbor, 71, born in Krakow, who had been part of their lives since Lily was 5, and who communicated affection primarily through feeding people and never asking permission first. She'd taken Lily after school because Nathan had asked, and she handed her back at the door with the information that Lily had eaten 2 bowls of Big O's and was very talkative about beavers, in case he needed to know. He needed to know. He always needed to know. After dinner and Lily's version of homework, which involved significant editorial opinions about word problems, and after the lights were out and the apartment was quiet, he sat at the kitchen table and opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice, handwritten in Derek's compressed print, in a mix of engineering shorthand and plain English. The message ran to 3 paragraphs. He read it once, then again, then a third time, sitting back in the chair and looking at the ceiling for a long time. Derek Marsh had known, when he worked on that Mustang, that the car was going to be used as a high-value asset in a structured financial fraud. He had written down what he'd pieced together at the time. He had hidden the note in the door because he didn't trust the people he was working for and didn't yet have enough to take to anyone official. He had written a name. The name was Preston Gale. Nathan did not sleep well. He lay in the dark and thought about the weight of what he was holding. Derek had suspected this 11 or more years ago. Had done the only thing available to him, left evidence inside the car, and trusted that eventually someone would find it who understood what they were looking at. You know what you're looking at, or you wouldn't have gotten this far. He hadn't written it for Nathan specifically. He couldn't have known. But Nathan was the person who'd found it. He thought about Claire Ashford standing in the garage in her dark jacket, asking how did this car end up here, and the way the question had sounded. Not rhetorical at all, but the sound of someone who had begun to suspect she didn't have the full shape of something she'd built her name around. She deserved to know. He was going to be careful about when and how, and he was going to be careful about Lily. The next morning, Claire was already in the garage when he arrived. "You said it's close to done," she said. "Today or tomorrow." She nodded quiet for a moment, then said, "The other specialists gave me summaries, their version of what mattered." She paused. "You documented everything, every step. Important to have a record," Nathan said carefully. "Especially when the asset has value someone might not have accounted for fully." She heard the weight under it. He could see it in the way she stilled. "How much value?" she said. He thought about how to do this. "Claire," he said, using her first name for the first time. "Before I answer that, I need to ask, the acquisition paperwork on this car, who handled it?" She held his gaze. "Preston did." Nathan nodded once. "Why?" Her voice had changed. Not afraid. More like someone who had picked up a sound in another room and was standing very still, listening. "I'd like you to have a lawyer look at those documents," he said. "Someone who has no connection to your company. Someone you trust personally." The silence in the garage was absolute. "Tell me what you found," she said. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He set Derek's letter on the work table between them. She read it slowly. He watched her face move through things that didn't have clean names. Recognition. The controlled vertigo of someone whose ground has been different than they believed for longer than they knew. When she looked up, her eyes were clear and careful. "How do you know this is real?" she said. "You don't know who Derek Marsh is." "I do, actually. He trained me. I'd know his handwriting anywhere." She looked at him steadily. "So he built the modifications into my car, left a letter naming Preston, and then years later, the one person alive who'd recognize his work just happened to show up." "That's about right." She was quiet for a moment. "Preston's been my business director for 6 years. Nathan said nothing to that. He didn't need to. "I need to make a call," she said. Her voice was level, the kind of level that costs something. She took the letter, folded it the way you fold something you understand is serious, and walked out with her phone already in her hand. Nathan turned back to the Mustang. He had an engine to finish. The car was done by Thursday. The final calibration took 4 hours, adjusting the fuel delivery against Derek's intake work until the two communicated the way he'd intended them to. Not correcting the modification, completing the conversation within it. When Nathan started the engine, the sound was something he hadn't expected to feel in his chest, low and composed and unmistakably purposeful in the way of work that had been done right the first time, and was still right. He found Claire on the main floor of the house, took one look at his face, and followed him back to the garage without stopping for a coat. October in the Okanagan was cold enough that he noticed. She stood outside the open bay and listened to the engine from 15 feet away and went completely still. "That's what it's supposed to sound like," she said. "That's what it was always going to sound like. Nobody had unlocked it." She looked at the car for a long moment, then at Nathan. "Come with me when I take it out." He hadn't expected that. "All right." She drove the back roads east of the property, up into the hills where the October larches were burning gold and the light came through them in long horizontal cuts across the road. She was careful at first, learning the car's language, where the weight settled, how the steering talked back, what it needed from her. After about 15 minutes, it stopped being adjustment and became conversation. Nathan sat in the passenger seat and watched the road and said nothing. "The lawyer's name is Helen Park," she said after a while. "She's handling it. Good. She thinks this is bigger than the car. I think that too." She took a long curve with confidence that hadn't been there when they'd left the driveway. The engine sang through it. "How long has Preston been doing this?" she said. Nathan thought about it. The letter's at least 10 years old based on the paper condition. Probably older. This wasn't opportunistic. It was planned. She was quiet for a long time. The road dropped into a valley, and the car held the descent with a sureness that felt almost reassuring. "Why would he keep the car here?" she said. "If it was connected to whatever he was doing, why not get rid of it?" Because getting rid of it meant explaining to you why an asset you liked had disappeared. And because, Nathan paused, he probably didn't understand what Derek had done inside it. Derek's work wasn't documented in any standard way. Preston may have known the car was tied to the scheme without knowing someone had left a record inside it. She shook her head, a small private movement of someone taking in something that doesn't get easier for being accepted. They drove another 20 minutes without talking much. When she pulled back through the gate, the Mustang was warm and running exactly as it should have been years ago. Nathan invoiced her from the truck in the driveway that afternoon. Fair rate, itemized. He drove home. Lily had been at school, picked up by Mrs. Kowalczyk, and was now on the living room floor with a book about migratory birds she'd gotten from the library because her class was doing a unit on wildlife corridors, and she had gone, as she usually did with topics that interested her, significantly beyond the assignment. She looked up when he came in. "You smell like engine," she said. "I was working on an engine. The blue car?" "The blue car." She turned back to the book. "Is it fixed?" "It's fixed." "Did the lady say thank you?" Nathan hung up his jacket. The envelope was no longer in the inner pocket. He'd handed it over, but he'd kept photographs of every page. "She did." "Good," Lily said, with the tone of someone who considered that the minimum acceptable outcome, and went back to the birds. Helen Park, it turned out, moved quickly. She called Nathan 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning while he was elbow-deep in a brake job on a 2018 Silverado. He wiped his hands and answered. "This is Helen Park, Claire Ashford's counsel. I understand you found a letter in her vehicle." "I did. I'd like to ask you some questions. About Derek Marsh, about your time with him, and about what you identified in that car." A pause. "Your cooperation is voluntary, but it could be material to a matter currently before the RCMP Commercial Crime Unit and the OSC." Nathan set the wrench down on the workbench. "How material?" "Significantly. The letter and the provenance of the modifications inside that car establish a timeline that we can't build any other way. You'd be a fact witness." "When?" "This week, if possible." He thought about it for roughly 4 seconds. "Tell me when and where." Helen Park's office was in a converted Victorian in downtown Kelowna that communicated competence through understatement rather than display. Her assistant was named Frances, who offered coffee before Nathan had found a seat and operated, with the quiet authority of someone who had been doing this job for 20 years and had forgotten more about how law firms worked than most articling students would ever learn. Helen herself was 60-something, small, with reading glasses on a chain, and the manner of someone who had stopped being surprised by human behavior sometime in the late 90s, but hadn't stopped being interested by it. She asked questions that opened space rather than closed it, and she listened with the kind of attention that told you she was building something from your answers, not confirming something she'd already decided. She asked Nathan to walk through the entire sequence. The phone call, the drive up to the property, every day at the garage, the discovery of the letter, the conversation with Claire. She asked specific questions about Derek's method, about what the modification signified in terms of rarity and value. She asked about the handwriting. You understand that your identification of the handwriting will be challenged, she said when he'd finished. You're not a document examiner. I know. But the modification and the letter corroborate each other. If someone disputes the letter, the engine confirms that Derek was there. If they dispute the engine, the letter provides context and intent. The two together are harder to argue with than either one alone. Helen looked at him over her glasses for a moment. Have you testified before? No. You present well for someone who hasn't. I'm just telling you what I found. She made a note. The forensic accountant started last week. What they're finding is consistent with the timeline you've established. She left it there. Nathan nodded. He drove home, thinking about Preston Gale standing at the work table with his hands in his pockets, looking at photographs that belonged to someone else. 3 weeks passed. A 2006 Tacoma came in with a tired timing chain. 2 days of methodical, satisfying work. A retired teacher named Gordon brought his 1978 GMC pickup, which he'd been nursing along for 16 years and wanted kept running for 16 more. Nathan spent an afternoon going through it with the care you'd give something that had been looked after and deserved the same in return. Gordon sat on a stool in the bay and drank the coffee Nathan had made and talked about the truck the way people talked about things they'd outlasted together. Normal days. Good days. Lily lost a tooth and spent 48 hours showing the gap to anyone within range. She finished the beaver diorama and got an A and said with complete seriousness that she felt Mrs. Kowalczyk deserved partial credit for moral support. He heard nothing from Claire. He hadn't expected to. She had a lawyer, an accountant, a regulatory investigation. She didn't need a mechanic for any of it. He told himself that. He checked on it occasionally, the way you check on something that's true but that you're still getting used to. Then on a Wednesday evening, he got a text from an unsaved number. Helen says the accountants found everything. The OSC is moving. He read it twice. Typed, good, stared at the screen for a moment, added, how are you holding up? The reply came 4 minutes later. Honestly, not sure yet. Still working that out. He put the phone on the counter and went to stir the soup that had been going too long. Still working that out. He understood that answer entirely. The first time Preston Gale's name appeared in a news item, it was a paragraph in the business section of a national paper, an alert about a regulatory inquiry into a Vancouver-based asset management firm. No names in the headline. Nathan found it while waiting for Lily's dentist appointment, standing in the beige waiting room with the children's fish tank gurgling against the wall and the news on his phone, making everything feel slightly unreal. The way significant things sometimes do when the surroundings don't know they're supposed to behave differently. Lily came out with a sticker on her shirt, a cartoon tooth giving a thumbs up, and announced that the hygienist had called her gum situation impressively maintained, which she delivered with the gravity of someone who had received a meaningful commendation. Nathan agreed it was impressive. They got hot chocolate on the walk back to the truck. Claire called the following Friday, an actual call, not a text, which meant something. Nathan was under the Tacoma again, a different Tacoma, same problem, different truck, and slid out to answer. Victoria, his first name for her, had shifted somewhere in the weeks between. She hadn't corrected it. Her voice was different from the first day. Slower, more actual. I wanted to check in. I know I've been a pause. There's been a lot happening. I know. I've been watching. Helen is filing the formal complaint on Monday. The RCMP have the accountant's report. They'll move after that. A long exhale. I keep thinking about 6 years. 6 years of trusting someone. And there were moments. I went back through things where something felt off and I chose not to look at it directly. That's different from not paying attention, Nathan said. Is it? You built something real. The fraud was around it, not inside it. Those aren't the same thing. You trusted the wrong person. That's not the same as being careless. Silence on the other end, long enough he wondered if she'd gone. You're very direct, she said finally. I've been told. I mean it as a compliment, a pause. How's Lily? The shift surprised him. He leaned against the truck frame. She told her whole class that Gerald Jr. The beaver was modeled after a specific individual in the Winfield Creek watershed. She cited him by name in her presentation. A genuine laugh came through the phone. Short, unguarded, slightly astonished at itself. That's excellent. The teacher asked if he was a real beaver. Lily said he was real in the ways that mattered. Another laugh. He filed that away without examining it too closely. They talked for another few minutes. When they hung up, Nathan stood in the quiet of his shop in the late afternoon and registered what it felt like to have talked to someone who had asked nothing of him except himself. He went back under the truck. The bail conditions became a headline on a Monday. Nathan learned about them from Helen, who called at 7:30 while he was making Lily's lunch. The OSC and RCMP have coordinated charges, she said. Securities fraud, wire fraud, breach of fiduciary duty. The asset provenance, which includes your documentation of the Mustang, is cited in the filing as establishing intent and timeline. He put the knife down. Okay, Preston Gale's counsel will fight it. That's their job. But the case is solid. A pause. How are you, Nathan? Fine. She let that sit. I'm going to give you some advice you haven't asked for. Keep your routine. Go to work. Pick up your daughter. Don't adjust your behavior in ways that signal you're rattled, because the worst thing you can do in a situation like this is become unpredictable. I'm not rattled. I know. I'm telling you anyway. He finished making the sandwich, drove Lily to school, watched her disappear through the doors with her backpack bouncing, and sat in the parking lot for 2 minutes longer than necessary, watching the ordinary morning happen. Then he drove to work. Preston Gale came to the shop on a Thursday. Nathan was alone. Lily was at school. The bay held a 2003 Jeep that needed a new set of ball joints. Straightforward work, meditative in the way that jobs without surprises sometimes are. He heard tires on the gravel, looked out, and recognized the dark blue SUV from the Ashford property. He didn't stop what he was doing. Preston walked in with his coat on and his hands visible and the same practiced ease Nathan had seen in the garage 3 weeks ago, the composure of a man who had decided that stillness was a form of authority. Mr. Holt. He looked around the shop with mild appreciation. Nice place. Nathan set down the torque wrench. He didn't say anything. I want to have a conversation, Preston said. Man to man. Off the record. He shifted slightly, not toward Nathan, just a movement that changed how the room felt. You found something in a car. You gave it to someone who didn't have the full context. I understand the instinct. You thought you were doing the right thing. Preston! The name came out flat. Preston's expression stayed pleasant. You have a daughter, Preston said. 9 years old. The temperature in the room changed. Nathan didn't move. He stood completely still and felt something settle in him that was not quite fear, but was older and harder than fear. The stillness of someone who has finished deciding something. You need to leave, Nathan said. I'm going to say this once. Leave this garage. Don't come back. Don't say my daughter's name again. Preston's smile thinned. He looked at Nathan for a long moment with the calculation visible now behind the surface of it. Then he straightened the collar of his coat, turned, and walked out. Nathan stood in the middle of the bay and breathed. Then he picked up his phone and called Helen Park. He came to my shop, he said when she answered. He mentioned Lily. He mentioned her age. Helen's voice went very precise, very fast. Did he threaten her directly? Indirectly. But clearly, don't call anyone else. Stay there. I'm contacting the RCMP in the next 2 minutes. She hung up. Nathan stood in the empty doorway and looked at the driveway where Preston's SUV had been and thought about Derek Marsh hiding a letter in a car door because it was the only thing he could do at the time, and about the particular kind of stupidity required to threaten a 9-year-old girl 2 weeks after federal regulatory charges had been filed. That was the moment it stopped being something Nathan had observed from the outside. That was the moment it became his. Helen moved fast. By the time Nathan had made coffee he didn't particularly want and was standing at the shop door watching the gravel driveway, the RCMP had been contacted and the lead investigator on the Gale case, a woman named Staff Sergeant Tremblay, who had the particular focused patience of someone who had been building a careful case and recognized when it had just become significantly easier, had been briefed. Helen called back in 35 minutes. What he did constitutes witness interference and obstruction. Tremblay wants a recorded statement today if you can get to the detachment. I can get there. Bring everything. Your documentation from the garage, copies of the photographs, anything from your time at the property. I have copies. A brief pause. Of course you do. Something in her voice that wasn't quite approval. More like recognition. 2 o'clock, don't be late. He wasn't late. He sat across from Staff Sergeant Tremblay in a room that was more ordinary than the word interrogation had led him to expect. Institutional gray, a table, a recorder. Tremblay was in her mid-40s, her hair pulled back, and she had the kind of eyes that logged everything without announcing it. She asked Nathan to walk through the entire sequence, beginning to end. She asked follow-up questions without leading him. Let him build toward things without interrupting. When he described Derek's modification in technical detail, she leaned forward slightly. When he described the letter and the handwriting, she asked precise questions about corroboration. When he got to the visit that morning, she asked for exact words, in order, without editorializing. The mention of your daughter's age, she said. He said 9 years old specifically, not just your daughter? That's right. She wrote something down. That's deliberate. That tells me he researched you. She looked up. Are you concerned for her safety? Nathan thought about it honestly. Alert, he said. Not quite concerned yet. But alert. We'll discuss protective measures. Think about it seriously. She closed her notebook. What he did gives us additional charges, and it tells us something important about where his head is right now. Innocent people don't drive to a mechanic's shop to make sure he's scared. He made a poor calculation. Nathan picked up Lily from school that afternoon and didn't say anything to her, except that they were going to Mrs. Kowalczyk's for dinner, which Lily greeted as unambiguously good news because Mrs. Kowalczyk was in the middle of a Parages phase and showed no signs of ending it. They walked the 4 blocks, and Lily held his hand and described a disagreement from recess that had involved 3 separate conflicting accounts of what the actual rules of a wall ball variation were. Nathan listened. He asked questions. He thought, underneath all of it, about Preston Gale, knowing his daughter was 9 years old. Mrs. Kowalczyk opened the door before they knocked. She looked at Lily and said, "Wash your hands." She looked at Nathan and said, "Sit." She put coffee in front of him and went back to the stove and said, "Without turning, something happened. Why do you think that?" "Because you're holding her hand like she might float away." She stirred something. "What happened?" He told her enough. He watched her face move through something complicated and arrive at a controlled stillness. "Is she in danger?" "I don't think so. The RCMP are moving. But I wanted you to know. If anything feels off, anything, you call me first." "Obviously," she said, in the tone of someone for whom this had been evident from the beginning. Then she sat down across from him and lowered her voice. "You did the right thing. I didn't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. You made the right one." She stood back up. "Now eat. You haven't eaten today." He hadn't, actually. The additional charges were filed on a Friday morning. Helen called at 8:15. Witness interference obstruction. The judge has Gale's bail conditions under review. Tremblay expects them to be substantially tightened. "Okay, how are you? Fine." She let that sit again. "My advice, Nathan, same as before. Routine, work, Lily. Don't change anything that signals you're rattled." I know you know. I'm telling you anyway." A pause. Ruth Calloway, a colleague I respect enormously, once told me the calmest witnesses she'd ever prepared were either people who had nothing to hide or people who had already decided they were going to tell the truth regardless of the consequences. You're the second kind. I just answer what's true. "Yes," she said. "That's why you're easy to prepare." He hung up, finished making Lily's lunch, drove her to school, and went to work. Claire called that afternoon. "I heard about what happened at your shop." Her voice was tight in a way he hadn't heard before. "Nathan, I'm sorry. He went to your shop because of me, because of the car." "He went to my shop because he made a bad decision," Nathan said. "That's on him. He knew Lily was 9. He looked into your family." "I know. That's..." She stopped. Started differently. "Stop building a case against yourself. This isn't yours to carry." Silence on the other end for a moment. "You said that to me?" she said quietly. "Because it was true then too," she exhaled. "I keep going back through 6 years of decisions. Every moment I could have looked more carefully at something, and didn't. It's exhausting." "Yeah," Nathan said. "That sounds about right." "Have you done that? Gone back through things?" He thought about the months after his wife died. The way he'd turned over every conversation, every afternoon, every moment where he might have been more present than he was. Whether she'd known how much, whether he'd said it enough, clearly enough, in a way she could hold on to. "Yeah," he said. "I've done that. Does it stop?" "Mostly. It gets quieter." He looked out the shop window at the gray November street. At some point you figure out which parts of it are worth learning from and which parts are just you punishing yourself. You try to keep the first kind. A long pause. a different quality than the silences before it. "That's useful," she said softly. "Took me a while to get there." She made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. "I should let you get back to work." "It's fine." And it was. The Jeep was done. The afternoon was quiet. "Are you sleeping?" "Better than I was." A pause. "You're surprisingly easy to talk to." "I've also been told that." She laughed. The real one, the unguarded one, the one that didn't know it was being noticed. And they talked for another 20 minutes about nothing consequential and everything a little, and when they hung up, Nathan sat at his workbench and watched the light fade out of the shop windows, and thought about how much had moved in the last 6 weeks without any of it announcing itself in advance. The bail revocation came on a Tuesday. Helen called at noon. Gale's remanded pending trial. His lawyers argued the visit was social. The judge disagreed. A pause. "The transcript of your statement was unambiguous. He's not going anywhere." Nathan set down his caliper. "Okay, you'll be called to testify at trial. We're looking at spring, depending on how his defense plays it. They may push for a plea arrangement first. I'll be ready." "I know." Her voice had warmth in it. "Carl Reinhardt trained someone well." She paused. "I mean Derek. Derek trained someone well." He almost smiled. "He did. He called Claire that evening to tell her." She was quieter than he expected. Not upset, more like she was letting something settle. "I thought I'd feel more," she said. "Relief, something final. But it mostly just feels like an ending that's been coming for so long it ran out of momentum." "That's probably right," Nathan said. "The real moment was when you found out. This is just the paperwork." She was quiet. "When you found the letter, was that the significant moment for you?" He thought about it. About sitting on that shop stool with Derek's envelope in both hands, reading it, feeling the full weight of what he was holding. "No," he said. "When I found it, what I felt was obligation. Like something had been handed to me and I had to figure out what to do with it. And then Preston came to my shop and mentioned Lily." He paused. After that, it was personal. She said nothing for a moment. "I'm glad it was you," she said. "Who found it?" "I'm glad it was someone who knew what they were looking at. Derek made sure of that. I just showed up." "That's not nothing, Nathan." He didn't have a response to that, so he held Hennett instead, and the quiet between them was the comfortable kind. November came in cold and stayed. Nathan put the winter tires on the truck, bought Lily a new parka she declared too bulky, and wore every single day, worked through a steady queue of regular jobs. An Odyssey with a wheel-bearing issue, a Subaru that needed a timing belt, a 2014 F-150 that had been making a sound its owner described as intermittently judgmental, which turned out to be a heat shield working itself loose against the exhaust. Honest work. The kind that paid the lease and the groceries and Lily's skating lessons and left the evenings quiet. Claire came by the shop on a Wednesday afternoon in the second week of November, without calling ahead. Nathan heard a car he didn't recognize pull up and looked out to find her climbing out of a dark green SUV, carrying 2 coffees from the place 2 blocks down that had recently started calling itself an artisanal roastery, which he'd been skeptical of, but had to admit was good. He slid out from under the F-150. "You found the shop." "You're listed," she said, looking around the bay. She handed him one of the coffees. "This place suits you." He leaned against the workbench. "You said something like that about your garage. I meant it both times." She looked at the technical diagram pinned to the wall, one corner decorated in purple crayon where Lily had been helping at age 6, and gotten distracted. Claire tilted her head at it. "Is that?" She was helping. A small smile. "I've been thinking about the car," she said. "About Derek and what he put into it. He did his best work inside something that was being used for something wrong. Like the car itself couldn't be fully corrupted by what was happening around it." Nathan looked at her. He hadn't thought of it that way, but she wasn't wrong. He believed the work outlasted everything else, he said. He used to say that a machine built honestly will tell the truth eventually. I thought he was being philosophical. Maybe he was being literal. Maybe. She turned the coffee cup in her hands. "I'd like to know more about him. Not for the case. Helen has everything she needs. But he's inside my car. He left something true in it." She looked at Nathan directly. "I'd like to know who he was." Nathan looked at her. At the way she held that question, not as small talk, but as something she meant. "I can tell you what I know," he said, "if you want to do that somewhere other than a garage." She met his eyes with the same directness he'd come to recognize as just how she was when she wasn't in the middle of managing something. Not performing anything, just present. "Dinner?" she said. "If Lily's okay with Mrs. Kowalczyk, let me check." Mrs. Kowalczyk, informed of the situation that evening, said simply, finally, in a tone that suggested she'd been waiting considerably longer than events warranted. The restaurant was a small Italian place on a side street in Kelowna that Claire had chosen, which told him something. It was good without announcing it. She was there when he arrived, which he appreciated more than he'd expected to. No performance of the late entrance. He talked about Derek the way he hadn't talked about him in years, about the warehouse in Sherwood Park, about arriving with an engineering degree and no idea what he didn't know yet, about Derek's conviction that the best modification was invisible, that the car shouldn't announce what had been done to it, only demonstrate, about the way Derek worked, methodically and without waste, and how watching him had reorganized something in Nathan's understanding of what good work actually meant. Claire listened the way she had in the car, without filling the space, without steering the story, just paying attention. "What happened to him?" she asked, when Nathan had wound down a bit. "After you left?" "I don't know, exactly. He closed the warehouse sometime around 2013. The industry lost track of him." Nathan looked at his glass. "I looked a few times." "There wasn't much to find, and you never went back?" "No. By the time things settled here, after my wife, there didn't seem to be a clear way back in. She didn't offer anything neat about that. She said, 'That's something to carry.' It is." They ate. They talked about other things. Her company, the particular exhaustion of being transparent with a board that was still deciding how to feel about her. He asked what she'd done with the board member, who admitted he'd had doubts about Preston for 2 years and said nothing. "I told him I expected that if he ever had that feeling again about anyone connected to me, he'd say it directly." She paused. "I also told him I appreciated the call. It would have been easier not to make it." "That's generous. Partly strategic. I need the board functional." She tilted her head. "Maybe a little generous." He smiled. She smiled back. The actual one, not the managed one. The smile of someone who was having dinner with a person they liked and had stopped monitoring themselves about it. He got home at 10:30 to find Mrs. Kowalczyk asleep in the armchair and Lily asleep on the couch, one hand around the stuffed beaver she'd named Gerald Jr., a library book tented on her chest. He turned off the lamp, stood in the quiet of the apartment for a moment, listening to it. Mrs. Kowalczyk stirred. She looked at the clock. At him. "Good," she said. "Yeah," he said. "Good." She nodded once, collected her coat, and let herself out. He carried Lily to her bed, tucked the blanket around her, retrieved Gerald Jr. from where he'd fallen, and stood in the doorway for a moment. His phone was on the counter. He picked it up and saw a message from Claire sent 20 minutes ago. "I had a really good time. Thank you for telling me about Derek." He stood in the kitchen in the quiet and typed back, "Me too. First time I've talked about him in a long time. It was good." He put the phone down, stood there for a moment in the ordinary silence of the apartment. Then he went to bed and slept better than he had in weeks. The plea came in February on a gray Tuesday morning when Nathan was making Lily's oatmeal and thinking about a cracked head gasket on a Durango coming in Thursday. Helen called at 8. "He entered the plea an hour ago," she said. "Securities fraud, wire fraud, breach of fiduciary duty. The witness interference charge was included separately. Sentencing is April." Nathan turned the heat down on the oatmeal. "Okay, your testimony helped establish the timeline and intent in a way that financial records alone couldn't. The modification and the letter together, one corroborates the other, exactly as you said." A pause. "Derek Marsh hid evidence in a car because it was the only thing he could do. You found it because you knew what you were looking at. That chain matters." He didn't say anything right away. He was thinking about the warehouse in Sherwood Park, about a February morning in Edmonton, with the cold coming up through the concrete floor, about a man who'd believed that the honest work would tell the truth eventually, and who'd never found out if he was right. "It's not nothing," he said finally. "No," Helen said. "It's not." Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, hair in several directions. "Is the oatmeal done?" 2 minutes. She sat at the table and put her chin in her hands and looked at the bowl with the patience of someone who had accepted the timeline but wanted it on record that she was waiting. Nathan got off the phone and served the oatmeal and sat across from her. and she told him about a dream she'd had in which Gerald Jr. the Beaver had testified in a court case about dam regulations. And the judge had been a heron, and this had all seemed completely normal until she woke up. He kept his face neutral for the duration. He texted Claire about the plea that morning. She replied, "How do you feel?" He thought about it. Like something that was supposed to happen finally did. "You?" Her reply came a few minutes later, the same. Also tired in a way I didn't expect. Like I've been holding something heavy and just put it down and now I feel how much it weighed. He understood that exactly. The sentencing was on a Tuesday in April. Nathan wasn't required to go. His testimony was in the record. Helen had told him his presence wasn't necessary. He went anyway. He dropped Lily at school, told her he had a meeting in Kelowna, and drove the 25 minutes with the radio off and his coffee going cold in the cup holder. He parked and walked into the federal courthouse and found a seat in the gallery without announcing himself to anyone. Claire was there, several rows ahead with Helen beside her. She turned to say something to Helen and saw him. A brief pause. Something in her expression settled. She nodded once. He nodded back. Preston Gale entered with his lawyers, looking like a man who had been slowly reduced over 6 months. Not dramatically. The posture was still practiced, the suit still good, but something had left him. The calibrated warmth, the ease that had been too precise to be accidental. The judge was a woman in her 60s with white hair and the manner of someone who had been here many times and was interested in facts rather than theater. She moved through the proceeding efficiently. She had clearly read everything. When she addressed the witness interference charge, she looked up and said, "Mr. Gale, you were facing serious federal charges. You were released on bail. You drove to the home of a fact witness, a man with a 9-year-old daughter, and made statements that any reasonable person would interpret as a threat toward that child." She paused. "I'd like to understand what you believe this would accomplish." His counsel began to speak. The judge held up one hand. Silence. "I was frightened," Preston said. His voice was quieter than Nathan remembered, stripped of the finish. "I made a very poor decision." "You did," the judge said. The sentence was 17 years. Nathan sat in the gallery and listened to the number and felt the weight of it settle. Not satisfaction, not relief in any simple form. Something more like what he felt at the end of a long job when the last component seated correctly and the engine turned and everything worked as it was supposed to. Not triumph. Just the recognition that something was complete. He thought about Derek Marsh leaving an envelope in a car door because it was the only thing available to him. Trusting that eventually the right person would open the right panel. He had died, if the forum posts were right, without knowing if anyone ever had. You know what you're looking at, or you wouldn't have gotten this far. He stood when it was over and filed out into the April afternoon. Claire found him 2 minutes later on the courthouse steps. Helen a few paces behind, already on her phone. They stood together looking at the street. The ordinary Tuesday happening around the edges of something that had just ended. 17 years, she said. "Yeah, Helen says 14 with good behavior. Probably. She was quiet for a moment. "Is that enough?" Nathan thought about it honestly. "I don't know what enough looks like," he said. "I know it's real. I know it's proportionate to what was established." He shook his head slightly. I think Derek would have been satisfied, not happy. That wasn't really his register. But satisfied. He believed the work would tell the truth eventually. He paused. I think it would have been enough for him. Claire stood beside him. Close, but not touching. They were outside a courthouse, the middle of an ordinary Tuesday. Just close enough that the proximity meant something. "You should find him," she said. He looked at her. "Derek. Whatever happened to him, wherever he went, you've been carrying the fact that you never went back, never found out. The trial's over, the letter's in the record." She held his gaze. "Close that loop, Nathan. For yourself." He didn't argue. She wasn't wrong. The sentencing hearing for Preston Gale was not the last significant Tuesday of that spring, though it took Nathan a few weeks to realize it. The others came quietly, the way the important ones often did, without announcement. The afternoon Claire came by the shop and stayed 3 hours, leaning against the workbench while he worked on a 72 Nova that needed a full suspension rebuild, talking about whatever surfaced, the company, the board, Lily's upcoming school trip to a wetlands conservation area, the fact that Gordon had brought the GMC back for its annual checkup and spent an hour asking Nathan's opinion on things that had nothing to do with the truck. The easy, unhurried quality of that afternoon. How it didn't feel like anything in particular except completely comfortable. The evening in May when Lily met Claire properly. Not the brief encounter at the shop, months earlier, but properly over dinner at the apartment, where Lily had strong opinions about where everyone should sit and presented Claire with a drawing she'd made of the Mustang, which she'd rendered in blue crayon, with what Nathan recognized as genuinely careful attention to the proportions. Claire had looked at it for a real moment and said, "The lines on the fastback are exactly right." And Lily had said, "I know, I looked it up," with the tone of someone for whom research was the expected minimum. After dinner, while Nathan was doing dishes, and Claire was sitting at the table listening to Lily explain the hierarchical social structure of the Beaver families in her watershed unit, with complete seriousness, he looked out through the kitchen doorway at the two of them, his daughter gesturing with a pencil, Claire leaning her chin on one hand and asking follow-up questions that took the whole thing seriously, and felt something that had been waiting, patient and unannounced, come fully into focus. Not a before and after. Just a recognition of something that had already been true for a while. He didn't say anything about it that night. He wasn't sure he needed to. Claire stayed until 9, helped Lily choose which library book to start before bed, and at the door looked at Nathan in a way that said she'd noticed the same thing. "Same time next week?" she said. "Yeah," he said. "Same time." He closed the door and stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to Lily already reading aloud to Gerald Jr. in a voice that brooked no interruption. Then he went back to the kitchen and finished the dishes. The summer came the way Okanagan summers came, abruptly and with complete conviction. The lake turned the color it was supposed to be. Lily's school year ended with a performance where her class presented their wildlife corridor research, and she stood up and talked for 4 minutes about riparian zones, with the assurance of someone who had not considered the possibility of being nervous. Gordon brought the GMC back for its summer tune-up and stayed 2 hours. Nathan fixed a succession of cars belonging to people he knew, and a few he didn't, did careful work on everyone, locked up at 6, and cooked dinner, and helped with whatever reading project Lily was in the middle of, and called Claire on the evenings when she was in Vancouver or Calgary, and she called him on the evenings when he'd gone quiet, which she'd learned to recognize and never commented on, just called. He found Derek in July. It took 3 weeks of careful looking, following threads that other searches hadn't bothered to pull. An email to a retired parts supplier in Red Deer, who'd known Derek's operation, a tip from a forum that predated most social media, a phone call to an automotive museum in Medicine Hat, where someone remembered someone who might have known someone. What came back, eventually, was a small custom furniture and woodworking shop outside of Nelson, British Columbia, run by a man who had left the automotive industry in 2013 and had apparently decided that wood had the same properties he'd valued in metal. Truth under pressure, clarity of grain, the reward of patient attention. Nathan drove to Nelson on a Saturday in late July. Claire offered to come. He thanked her and said he needed to do this one alone. He got there at 11 in the morning. The shop was a converted barn set back from a gravel road, with the bay doors open and the smell of cedar and sawdust coming out into the warm air, and in the back of the main space, bent over a workbench examining a dovetail joint with the focused intensity Nathan recognized before he saw the face, was Derek Marsh. He was older, heavier in the shoulders, hair gone mostly gray, but the way he held his hands over the work, still measuring patient, was exactly the same. Derek looked up. A long moment. "Holt," he said. "Derek." Derek set down the joint and straightened up and looked at Nathan with the expression of someone doing rapid and comprehensive assessment. "You found the letter." It wasn't a question. "I found the letter," Nathan said. Derek nodded slowly. He looked out the open bay doors at the summer afternoon, at the hills above Nelson gone green and enormous. "I didn't know if anyone ever would," he said. "I didn't know who'd know what they were looking at." "You made sure they would," Nathan said. "The modification made it impossible to miss. If someone knew your work, they'd know it was yours. And if they didn't know my work, they wouldn't know what to do with the letter anyway." Derek looked at him. "Took you long enough." "I wasn't looking," Nathan said. "Not until someone hired me to fix it." A long pause. The cedar and sawdust, the hills. "There was a woman," Nathan said. "Claire Ashford. She didn't know. Gail had been her business director for 6 years. She trusted him. And now?" 17 years. He took a plea in February, sentencing in April. Derek said nothing for a moment. He looked at the workbench, at the dovetail joint resting on it, at his own hands. 17 years, he said, not with satisfaction and not without it. He came to my shop, Nathan said. Mentioned my daughter. Derek looked at him sharply. The RCMP moved on it. He's remanded. You have a daughter, 9 years old. Her name's Lily. Nathan looked at him. Her mother died 4 years ago. Derek held his gaze and said nothing for a moment, which was what Derek had always done when he understood the weight of what he'd been handed and didn't want to reduce it. I'm sorry, he said finally. I know. They stood in the shop for a while longer. Derek made coffee on a small machine in the corner, handed Nathan a mug without asking, and they talked for 2 hours. About the furniture work, about Nelson, about what Derek had been doing in the years between, about the warehouse in Sherwood Park, about a cold February morning, and a kid from Kelowna who'd showed up with more confidence than he'd earned yet and turned out to be useful. Before Nathan left, Derek went to a shelf in the back of the shop and came back with a notebook. Worn cover, pages thickened with use, the handwriting inside cramped and familiar. Workshop notes from the Sherwood Park years, he said. I kept them all. Thought you should have the ones on the Mustang build. He paused. Should have been documented properly from the start. Better late. Nathan took the notebook. He sat in the car in Derek's driveway for a moment before starting the engine. He looked at the notebook on the passenger seat, the handwriting on the cover. Then he started the engine and drove back toward Kelowna, through the summer afternoon, through the mountains coming down to the lake, and thought about all the roads that had looked like detours and turned out to be the way there. He called Claire from a pullout above the lake, with the water turning orange in the evening light below. She picked up on the first ring. How was it? He's alive, Nathan said. He's in Nelson. He's making furniture. He looked at the lake. He said, took you long enough. A pause. Then a laugh, the good one, the real one. That sounds exactly like what you'd have told me to expect. It does. Are you okay? He thought about it. The shop in Nelson. The smell of cedar. Derek's hands over the joint. 17 years. The notebook on the passenger seat. Lily's drawing of the Mustang on the fridge at home. Yeah, he said. I think I actually am good, she said. Just that. The way she said things she meant simply. He drove home as the evening settled over the valley, the lights of the towns below coming on one by one, and the lake holding the last of the light longer than everything else. The way it always did, patient and unhurried, the way certain things are when they've been here long enough to know that evenings always come back around. Lily was at the kitchen table when he got in, working on a map of migratory bird routes she was making for fun, which was how she did most things. Because they interested her, not because anyone had asked. She looked up. Did you find him? I found him. Was he okay? Nathan set the notebook on the counter and sat down across from her. He's good. He's making furniture now. Lily considered this. Does furniture have the same parts as cars? Some of the same principles. She seemed to find this satisfactory. She looked at the notebook. Is that his? He wanted me to have it. She looked at it for a long moment with the seriousness she brought to things that mattered. Can I see it sometime? Yeah, Nathan said. Sometime. She nodded and went back to the bird map. He sat across from her, in the quiet of the apartment, in the good ordinary wait of a Tuesday evening in July, and thought about Derek saying, took you long enough, and about Claire's laugh on the phone above the lake, and about an envelope in a car door that had waited 11 years for someone to know what they were looking at. Some things, he thought, take the route they need to take. You don't always get to know the shape of it until you're most of the way through. You just do the honest work and trust that it tells the truth eventually. Outside, the evening was warm and the lake was still holding the light.